All right, I think we have a few more people joining, so maybe we could go ahead and get started, and I could do a brief introduction. My name is Melanie Standish, and I work for the National Center for Healthcare Leadership. NCHL is very excited to offer part 2 of this webinar series with our partners, First Group and Newbrick Partners, with this webinar titled Push and Pull for Talent, Insight from Talent Management Leaders. We have 3 phenomenal speakers today. If you didn't tune into part 1, I've been told we'll bring in a brief summary for part 1 for everyone who couldn't attend before, but there's also a recording of the previous webinar if anyone wants to tune into that after this one as well. If we want to move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. Just a little bit about the National Center for Healthcare Leadership for those who might not know us. Our goal is really to advance healthcare leadership by addressing critical issues facing today's leaders. In doing that, we actually run 3 premier programs, including our Leadership Excellence Networks, our National Council on Administrative Fellowships, and our U.S. Cooperative for International Patient Programs. Combined, we do a lot of really incredible work, and I encourage everyone to go to nchl.org to find out more. Next slide, please. And more importantly, I guess timely for right now, our Bold Ideas 2020 Human Capital Investment Conference will be taking place November 16th through 20th. We're going to have some really fantastic sessions, and registration actually ends this upcoming Monday. So we encourage everyone to go ahead and get registered. It is hosted virtually, and we've done a really nice job of trying to spread out our sessions over the course of the week so that we can resist the Zoom fatigue that we're all feeling nowadays. So we hope everyone joins us. Our First Group partners will be in attendance too, and we think it'll be a fantastic event. Next slide, please. Without further ado, I do want to get started and briefly introduce our incredible speakers for today. We have Deanna Banks, a trusted advisor with more than 25 years of experience as a human capital consultant and thought leader on diversity. She's worked with tons of leading U.S. health systems and is a fantastic thought leader in this space. We also today have Tim Frischman, 26 years of helping organizations transform their leadership teams through recruitment, retention, and organizational development. He's partnered with many organizations to conduct searches for their board of directors, chief executive officers, and senior leaders across all functional areas. And then last but not least, we have Kevin Reddy, who's going to kick off this webinar today. Trusted by his clients to address C-suite leadership needs in their organizations. He has a specific focus on transforming healthcare organizations to move to true population health management. And so we have a fantastic group of presenters today. And without further ado, I'll pass it over to Kevin.
Great. Thank you, Melanie. I appreciate the introduction, and welcome everybody for what is part 2 of our 2-part seminar on the push and pull for talent. I'm excited to be joined by my trusted colleagues, Tim and Deanna, today. In part 2 of the presentation, we continue with our theme of the push and pull for talent. Last week, we talked a lot about the decision-making model that individuals go through as they consider their career moves and opportunities, and how organizations such as First Group or other outside influencers try to push people to take looks at careers outside their current organizations, and went through a professional assessment algorithm, which we'll get to in a moment. This week is about the pull, and how do organizations and leaders continually engage and align their people through different retention activities and programs. You should remember this model can be used by really anyone. It's very individualized for folks in wherever they are in their point in their career. There are 4 quadrants we'll address again today: the opportunity at hand, the geography implications, the timing as we all go through different seasons of life, and compensation and total rewards. The first thing I'd like to do is just kind of call your attention to the importance of the retention of your valuable workforce. Here are some recent headlines and some resources that we pulled that we think will help you as you continue to pull and constantly recruit your valued talent in terms of engagement and satisfaction in their organization. Today, we will share some stories from the front and some examples of what we've heard and seen in sometimes missed opportunities for retention and engagement. I do want to also state that we understand and respect that as leaders in organizational development, human resources, or other areas of your organization, you have very robust and strong retention programs. We're not here to do anything but hopefully add some additional thought and examples from real world that will help you only enhance and retain and develop additional ideas. One last point, during the discussion, I think we'll be referring to high potential and high performance employees. And as you know, sometimes they're one and the same, but sometimes they're not. And for the purposes of this conversation, I want to delineate a little bit that description. A high performance employee, well, probably high potential, is somebody who is already functioning at an advanced level, at a very productive level in the organization. And the departure of that person from your organization will likely have a shorter term adverse impact because they are functioning and creating value, and they represent an asset for you if you would have an unplanned turnover or vacancy somewhere around them in the organization, and they could be sort of that immediate plug and play to expand their opportunity and their growth. The high potentials are not always people who have developed that level of experience and expertise, and while you're still investing in them and you want to retain them because they do offer current value and future value, we just want to make sure that there's a little distinction between those terms as we go through our discussion today. And today we're going to start with the geography quadrant. We're leaving opportunity for last. That's probably where the bulk of our discussion will happen. So one of the things that's interesting is that as a current employer, you kind of already have a built-in advantage in the geography section of the retention and decision-making quadrant. Your employees are already engaged. They're already in your community. They're aligned, hopefully, with decisions they've made around where they're living and working. You know, there are lots of opportunities, hopefully, for folks to continue to grow within their geography. But there are a couple of reasons to think a little differently about that. We've all seen an increase in merger and acquisitions, systems and healthcare entities combining, and that often creates, or maybe you're already in, an organization that has multiple geographies across multiple states or a national presence. And I guess there's just a thought process that if a person is ready for a promotional opportunity, that this could come into play if it would require relocation to a different market. Tim, my first question I wanted to just have you start out with giving some thoughts is, you know, what are some ways that you see current employers furthering the support or engagement of their employees to become even more tied, ingrained, and engaged in their current markets, even if it's outside their current job responsibilities or outside the organization?
Yeah, Kevin, great question. And maybe just to tie back to something you stated and put a little bit of an underscore under it, just given its importance. One of the number one things that we face every single time we reach out to a potential candidate about an opportunity outside of their current organization starts with the geography implications or surrounds the geography implications, because it kind of equates to the disruption for their family or their personal circumstances. So as Kevin highlighted, when you have an employee in your organization, in that community, the connectedness that they have to the community actually does matter. There's a professional connectedness within the organization and what that represents. And some of the things that we find is that the deeper the tentacles that your either high performers, high potentials, or your leaders have into the community, even outside of your organization, it's almost like a root system. You know, the deeper they go, the more difficult it is to extract it out. So we've seen companies start to provide, volunteerism reimbursement, so paid time off for volunteerism. There's this huge promotion and/or even an expectation that they're going to be involved in not-for-profit or other types of community-related boards, which is always great for their own development. But certainly, it's an open discussion that the leaders in the organization have, and the encouragement and expectation that those leaders on that team are going to be involved in their community in a way that goes outside of just their day-to-day job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would just kind of
Deanna,
add
any
to
other
that,
thoughts
if I
on that?
could. I do. I would just say a couple things. It's a timely topic, given the fact that many of us are working virtually today, given the current environment we find ourselves in. And I think it's a huge opportunity. I can also say that I'm pleased to be working with an organization that was a trailblazer in this space, and I've worked remotely for more than 20 years. And it provided a great degree of balance for me as a working mother and a professional. It was a huge opportunity. And I would say organizations would be, missing a great opportunity to really kind of invest in being able to have access to staff working virtually in a different way. I think from not only retaining that talent and improving their level of engagement with organizations, but I think the opportunity to find some new ways to continue to keep them engaged will be another huge opportunity for organizations to think about how do we utilize the technology and really lean into that. I think coupled with that, the fact that another trend that we're seeing in the industry for the last couple of years really have been organizations who, for many, if you think about some of our larger health systems, kind of required individuals to relocate, to take advantage of promotional opportunities, and now have been offering them the opportunity to remain so they don't have to uproot perhaps school-age children or move away from a resource system. And so I think it can offer you a greater access to talent than it has before, given organizations are now a lot more willing to flex, that they can see the productivity remains and in some cases can be even higher. So I think it's a huge opportunity for organizations to really kind of lean into the new environment that we find ourselves kind of thrust into.
Yeah, it's a great point. Deanna, speaking of the M&A activity and growth in organizations, especially as they might combine their talent pools, are there any missed opportunities or potential risks as organizations come together to really understand what talent exists in the other organization that they've just joined, whether it's through systems or knowledge share? What are we seeing in those areas given the current dynamics?
Yeah, that's a great point. And we've seen that a lot. We've been called into organizations to help them either kind of a pre-merge or a joint venture situation or on the back end of it. And inevitably in, either scenario, we found that there's a lot of preparation that goes into the greater organizational structure, but I think a lot more can kind of be put into maximizing the talent as a part of it. I think everybody look at the obvious pieces where there's duplication of roles and seek to create some linearness within their organization. In some cases, people can be repurposed in that situation, which can be of value. But I think being able to lean into your HRIS system and make sure that you've got some strong tools in place. I'm not sitting here trying to promote one system over another, but I do think some work better than others, quite frankly. And being able to use that data to understand you've got identified high performers or high potentials within your organization, and seek to find every opportunity to be able to repurpose that talent if there is a duplication in a role, or even find new roles for them is critically important. So many times people get outplaced as a result of M&A activity, which often is no fault of their own, clearly. But I think organizations fail to really realize how much it's going to cost them to bring that talent back into their organization. And we've seen some astronomical numbers of the cost of replacing talent. And being sure that you're optimizing that talent and finding opportunities to keep them is a really important step.
Great. Any other thoughts on that, Tim, or we can move on to the next topic?
No, I think we can go to the next topic.
Great. Okay, so the next topic that we'll talk about today is timing. And as we think about timing, there's kind of an overarching theme, I think, that we see from our business and executive search. And one of those is, our business is we're doing that push. We're getting people to look at new opportunities. And, the candidate that just accepted a new role now has that sort of uncomfortable task of going in to resign in their current organization to their leader. And, of course, we've got all sorts of tools and tricks that we want to use to make sure that counteroffers are, well thought through. But anyway, one of the things that happens is that the person goes in, has this heartfelt conversation with their leader, and the leader comes back with, "Oh my gosh, Deanna, you're such a value to our organization. We have big plans for you, and this is going to impact us and our team, and the value, and we don't want you to leave. We want you to really stay. And then sometimes even that conversation ends up with, what's it going to take from a compensation perspective? We'll offer you more money. Well, the feedback we get more often than not from those candidates who have experienced that is that leaves a pretty bad taste in their mouth. It's sort of about missed opportunity in terms of timing and the communication with how important and valuable they are viewed by their leadership in the organization. So, Tim, I don't know if you've got some thoughts or examples that you could think of on the timing as it relates to missed development or retention opportunities. One of the things that just as a follow-up is, people go through exit interviews as they leave organizations. Now we're hearing a lot more about ongoing stay interviews or stay conversations. Talk to us a little bit about your experience in this space.
Yeah, and I think for those who are able to participate in part one, the lens that we're bringing to these 4 quadrants is largely around the conversations that we've had with candidates over years around how they make decisions to both engage in a process, but also, some of the same things that may cause them to opt out of a process at some juncture during the search effort. As it relates to timing, Kevin, maybe just to kind of play off of what you described, which is the candidate who engages because they're unclear where their career options are. The timing is they're ready for the next step. They feel as though they have some horizontal ceiling that's creeping in, and they feel like, okay, I'm going to need to move outside of the organization. So they begin, and they're still, intrigued, but maybe not even emotionally over the chasm of this is whatever we may be working on, this is exactly what they want to do. They cross that, they see the opportunity, they're engaged, they're intellectually already into the new role. They go in and give notice, and what they come to find out in a deeply disappointing way is that there was a path for them, but it had not been communicated. So the timing is such is, whether you want to acknowledge it or not, your individual high performers or high pros have a pathway in their mind of what they want to do professionally. There's a timing trigger by which they're ready to go do something else. If you're not having the real conversation with them around what your expectations are, or what you see that lies ahead for them, or what you can do to help encourage that, it creates that window of opportunity for us to engage them, only to find out that it was a miscommunication issue than it really was a timing issue. So just timing takes on a couple of different fronts, but it's just really clear that your leaders do have an idea of what they want to do and when they want to do it. And the more unclear or murkier it is in terms of what that may lie ahead for them, the more apt we're going to be able to get an audience.
Yeah. That's another great point, Tim. And what I would say, just to kind of add to that, it's not only managing those conversations and the development around those high performers, but also you think about the impact for those where you might be a potential high performer or high achiever, and you find yourself working under what we affectionately call in our world a management blocker. Somebody perhaps who has been working in a job for some time, their skill set maybe has gotten a bit stale, they're not challenging those high performers that are working beneath them. And the failure to move them will have residual effects within the organization. In a particular scenario where we were representing a client, he ended up to have us engage with them to be able to find one leader, which he thought initially was just going to be one, and end up being multiple needs as a result of the fact that they did not transition a leader who had really lost their effectiveness. And as a result of their delay in doing so, they ended up losing 3 other leaders at the same time, or potential leaders that were still growing within their organization. And so, in short, the management of those who may be less effective in your organization sets a really strong message to those that are there doing the job every day, very dedicated to the organization. And it has a significant cost, as well as a cost to morale and engagement with staff. So encourage you to think about that as well. And I think the other piece is you're managing your organization and you're looking at that, especially if we're thinking about some of our talent strategists that are on the line or part of this webinar today. Also think about, as people are looking to the left and the right, the pace with which peers within their organization are being promoted. And if you see your skill set to be equally strong and others are being promoted and you're not, that is also something that's very critical. And we hear a lot from leaders where, as Tim said, there's a timing affixed to what I believe to be my value and my capabilities. And if it's not being met within my current organization, it may cause others to look externally.
Those are great points. And just last week, Deanna, we talked about the theme around the differences in the generations in our workforce. So can you think of any, talk about any of the unique aspects that might be important for retaining those younger generations of the workforce?
Yeah. So, we do work in a multi-generational workforce and in one that has more generations in it than ever before. I think the reality is we each look for and desire different things. And as we've been talking to some others and working with them throughout our career, clearly we note that individuals from our generation and baby boomers alike, we came from a generation where it was really, we're kind of head down and we work and there's an expectation that I do the job and somebody will come through and I'll get the nod eventually. I will tell you the millennials and these Gen Zers are very different. Their expectations are they're coming in with a clear defined path for their growth and they've got some distinct timing affixed to that. And if they don't feel like those pieces are being met, they're definitely going to be looking to transition. But equally so, the things that they look for, there might be some that just, continue to strive and aspire for the corner office or a certain title within their position. Again, some of the younger leaders right now, work-life balance is critically important to them. Some really do not aspire to move into a corner office. It's really more about impact and culture. It's more about where they feel engaged and developed within organizations. And we've even been speaking to some leaders who, even though we see a lot of potential in their capabilities, feel like I have no desire to strive to be in a CEO role. I feel like my value and impact to an organization is just what I need in my life at a vice president level and have no desire to move any further. And I can truly appreciate it. I think that people are really realizing and valuing what's important and making decisions around their career accordingly.
Yeah, those are all great points. So, let's move on to our next quadrant, which really is around compensation and total rewards. And this really does dovetail nicely with all three of the other quadrants. I think it's important that, we point out that we talked last week about the cash piece, right? You've got an annual base, you've got potentially an incentive, and every organization sort of has their strategy of where they want to be on that continuum of the percentile. This role in this market, this size company, we want to be at the 50th percentile or the 60th or the 30th. And all I would say about that is that we want to make sure that if there is a sort of a perceived discrepancy in not being at the midpoint or above, it can be really handled through the whole conversation around the total package and the total rewards. So just keeping a pulse of that on that in the competitive market is important. So Tim, as we're thinking about the whole total rewards and retention, what are some of the things you've seen maybe emerging or that you're hearing from folks in your network that create that stickiness, beyond the cash and the health benefits and those kinds of things? What are some of those topics today that are in the market?
Yeah, Kevin, what's fascinating about the work that we do is from an outsider's perception, they would assume that, just because a position pays above average, that there should be absolutely no challenge, that there's no issue, that people would be jumping for it, that somehow compensation is the number one driver. Kind of bringing it back to the algorithm and what we discussed last week, compensation is but one of four factors. Yes, it is independent and it could blow up the whole thing, but that doesn't mean that people have to make more than what they make today. People can make decisions as long as they're living within their means. So how that relates to this discussion is if the opportunity is extremely high. They're passionate, they love the organization, they love the role, they're in the geography. They will be willing to work for less to a certain degree. But then you say, well, what would it take? What we're seeing is that for those organizations whose culture tends to approach things like professional development, coaching, things of that nature, is more remedial, meaning we've got a problem, we need to bring in a coach. People around you see that. They go, oh my gosh, the coach is here. Well, we knew that because John was having problems. But all of a sudden you find someone and you want to invest in their development, their openness and receptivity to a coach will be concerning, because the perception is that if you have a coach, something's wrong. So for those organizations that develop a culture of coaching around performance and performance development, it demonstrates a commitment to them and their personal and professional growth. In the overarching economic world, it is not nearly as much as even bumping up 1% or 2% on the compensation scale, but yet you've shown that individual you're interested in them, you're investing in them, and you believe in them for your organization. So we do feel like, in the total rewards camp, compensation will matter as long as you have to be competitive with your market, but there are some things that can be done that invest in that individual that certainly will make them that much more engaged in what's going on.
Yeah.
And we'll come back to jump on coaching in a minute. But Tim, one of the things I wanted to make sure we talked about in this space is, besides the development, we can kind of tie it back to geography, and there are opportunities sometimes outside of the development or the cash, and it'd be things about how they could be more interconnected in the community. What are some of the benefits that you're seeing with people who are getting, the opportunity to do things that are meaningful to them, even if it's outside their day job?
Yeah, it kind of ties back to the geography piece where, there are ways to encourage. So the volunteer, paid time off for volunteering, maybe there's an additional space that's created for boards, things of that nature. But it is the interconnectedness of how this works. Each one of them, while different, they do interconnect with each other. I think the piece on compensation, and then, Deanna, I know you had a comment that just I want to emphasize is, this is usually one that people are uncomfortable talking about. The compensation laws are shifting where even for us in our engagement with individuals, we're not talking about where they are today. It is becoming much more of a expectation-based type of environment, which means you're leaning into your compensation surveys, leaning into what is market is going to be much more important, because you will no longer simply be able to say to someone, you make X, so we're going to offer you X plus whatever percent. That those conversations, you're going to have to start from what is market competitiveness, because that's what the candidates research will likely be bringing forward. So we are seeing a lot of shifts that create a degree of higher sophistication and understanding of what's going on in the market, and the ability to kind of navigate what is new terrain for all of us, but really is based on what is the market and what is the expectation of that individual for that particular role.
Yeah, I would just add, a couple things I thought about from the last couple comments you made, Tim. Around the compensation piece, I think, again, this is another component. It should be really a pillar of an extremely strong retention program. It's ensuring that your compensation strategy remains current and contemporary. There are a lot of organizations, especially a number of our academic medical centers, that have historically offered a tuition benefit, and it's been a very rich benefit, but we've seen some of the academic institutions kind of moving away from that. So that is something, again, it may have been a very attractive benefit very early on, but you may find that that's shifting and not having the traction that it used to, given you all have changed your benefit plan. The other thing too, I think a number of organizations have historically perhaps not been, they've touted they're not the highest payer in the market, and people tended to want to work for them for those benefits, or, the opportunity to work for an institution that was doing research at a certain level. And as those things have shifted, I think organizations perhaps have still maintained their same strategy and mentality around talent, and not, kind of come up to date with some more contemporary practices. If you continue to rest on, your laurels and those same competitive advantages that you may have had before, we found organizations who have found some of their top talent rated. They've left because other employers could easily attract them because they were being paid below market. And something as simple as making sure on an annual basis that you're reviewing your compensation strategy and ensuring that it's current is a very critical component. On the other comment, Tim, that you made around coaching, we talked about, working in a multi-generational workforce and the desire to see, perhaps things that may not be a monetary benefit that are equally valuable. We see organizations now looking to invest in coaching services for leaders that might be early careerists. And that is extremely valuable in retaining their talent and investing in them from their own leadership development. Organizations that we've seen, like I say, not only invest in that, but the creation of a leadership development plan, the commitment of assigning them with a coach, and some of them they're peer coaching environments where they may bring together groups. We've seen some reverse coaching that's going on. They're pairing senior leaders in the organization with some of the early careers as well. It's also been something that's been extremely valuable, and that has dual benefits. I've been the benefactor of some reverse coaching, quite honestly, and the ability to work with some of our early careerists in our organization and their savviness with some of the social media tools and technology tools have been invaluable. And so definitely encourage that, with organizations that have demonstrated as a best practice in retaining talent.
Hey, team, we have a question from the audience, and I want to remind everyone to use the chat if you have a question. This is really relevant to our current conversation. Regarding compensation, many HR platforms or application platforms require salary info and on past positions, as well as social security numbers, and sometimes other information that the applicant cannot opt out of. I'd like to kind of get our panelists' thoughts on that question. I know from where we stand, we really support the wage inequity laws. So there are certain states and jurisdictions where that will have to be changed, whether the application will have to be changed or create the opt-out function. And of course, everyone's very hesitant to share social security numbers. I know we get those from candidates when we're doing background checks, but it's completely hidden in our systems. But Tim and Deanna, any other thoughts on that or suggestions?
I don't know. I don't purport to have perhaps, I'm not a lawyer and I don't want to misspeak, but I do think the reality is if you're not comfortable with the information that's being requested, opt out, speak to the hiring authority, let them know, send a message to the system. If you're working with a recruiter, let them know. But I think there's a lot of that information. And I think if they're still requesting some of that, it may be a bit dated. And if they're asking for an expectation, you always have the opportunity to pivot and ask a question of your own. Help me understand some of the compensation parameters for the role. And then equipped with that information, you may feel more confident about giving your answer.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add, just especially for this audience, recognizing that we're going to be scattered over a variety of different geographies, please note Deanna's disclaimer, we're not attorneys, so we're not in any way suggesting this is legal counsel. What is, I think, important to highlight is because we have a national footprint and just our passion and confidence in the importance of the wage inequity laws, we were seeing enormous variance with where we had clients located and where the candidates were located. And we had differences in how individual state or city laws were applying the wage equity, equality efforts. So in some cases, we would be able to legally talk to a candidate about their current situation. In other cases, we couldn't. In some states, if the candidates ask, you have to tell them exactly where it is. So if you do have a HRIS system that is structured in a way that you are required to either have to have these as inputs, again, this is not legal advice, but you will want to take a look at what are the implications of that in today's environment, because we are seeing tremendous variance from state to state as different states look at how they're adopting this.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Well, let's move on to in the interest of time, our last segment here on opportunity. And as we've discussed in the past, there is a lot to cover in the opportunity section. I just want to start with a statement that Tim and Deanna and I have been talking about for a while, which is people work for people. So when you think about, bringing new people into your organization, they may be attracted for a number of reasons. It could be the work you do, your mission, your reputation as employer, name as many as you want. But once they get started and they're reporting to a leader in that organization, that really begins their employee engagement and their employee experience. So first question for you, Deanna, is, as you think about organizations really wanting to create that strong sense of alignment, new hires, existing hires, ongoing, what are some common themes you're hearing from people in your professional network that employers are offering, or events and things that happen that really pull them and solidify their alignment and their commitment to their organization?
Yeah. Kevin, we all know it is, again, very timely. People work for other people that they like. They may be attracted initially to an organization. They may be attracted to their mission. But at the end of the day, it's really going to come down to who I report to and the people I'm going to be working with, given the investment of time that we all spend working within our particular vocations. And I'd say a couple things. An organization's ability to really show who they are. I mean, your culture, your mission, and it needs to be supported, not just with words, but deeds. So you need to be able to see that personified in an interview process. The same is true for your diversity and your culture. You'd like to see representation within diversity within those that are part of the interview process. If you say you're an organization that is committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, when you begin to, hopefully we get back to an atypical environment and you get a chance to take a tour around an office. Does the art on the walls reflect an inclusive culture? Those are all the things that, one is going to be looking at in addition to data that's out there. They're going to be taking that physical kind of, you take it in as you go. If you think about your social media footprint, if you go out there and see the types of things that they're connected to, monies that are, given to support charitable events within the community, or the things that they are excited about and get them really jazzed about wanting to be a part of that organization, will all be critically important. As Kevin, as we also think about, leaders in an organization, if you're new to an organization and, somebody may be sitting in the CEO role who's been there, a decade or so longer, keep in mind that, individuals new to the organization have no idea of that person's track record, progression, what it took to get to that particular position. And so we've heard about organizations, and some of our clients are, basically doing some of these, instead of just doing maybe more of a traditional town hall, they're taking the time to do some personal videos and interview some senior leaders in the organization to help describe, well, what has been your career pathway? I started in this organization perhaps in X role, and throughout my years, I was promoted into different environments and worked my way up. That is a very powerful testimony for somebody to be able to hear that I have the potential to work in an organization that not only says they do these things, but I can see it demonstrated in the career of others that I might see in the C-suite. Extremely exciting. And that's also true for diversity. You need to make sure it's represented within the C-suite. You need to make sure it's represented within the board, and you feel like you have voice and a seat at the table. The other things I was just thinking about, and I don't want to monopolize this conversation, but it's something that as an organization we've been committed to for many decades. And obviously there's a lot of passion there for our organization. Right now I think it's extremely, I don't want to say that it's disingenuous by some, but I do think there are many that have now, become much more hyper-focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion for obvious reasons due to a lot of the high level of tone in this country around the social injustice that still is very prevalent, and the fact of some of the racism that we have in organizations. Employees are very, new employees, current employees are very much paying attention to their organizations and really want to understand, what type of stance is my employer taking? How involved are we getting involved in the community to be a part of the change that's happening? And so making sure that your organization is engaged and not turning a blind eye to what is happening socially, within your community and nationally, that you are having an appropriate response in a timely fashion will be important to employees to understand that, I'm working with an organization that is engaged, that understands that what is impacting our greater community is also impacting us as a workforce and individuals. And then leaning into that, I think is so powerful. And we've seen some really strong examples of organizations that have put together videos to speak to that. They've come together in their communities as leaders and made statements about what that organization is going to do in terms of their own hiring practices. And it's always been extremely impactful. So again, I will pause there, but you can hear probably my passion and excitement when we begin to talk about things like that.
It's wonderful.
Deanna,
thank you, Deanna. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I want to just touch on one thing Deanna mentioned. I thought she did, just great overview. If you think about the leaders in your own organization, and just think of it this way for a moment, somebody looking at your enterprise to be able to identify, how do I think I'd fit? How do I think I'd feel? What is their reputation? To Deanna's point, they're going to go to your website. They're going to figure out what the brand represents. They're going to pull in some social media. I think the one area that companies maybe underestimate the implication of is that those leaders and those employees who leave your organization are likely going to interview with your competitors or others around you. Mm. And how they describe their experience of working for your organization, or how they felt about how they were treated as they left the organization, that angst or the frustration, they're not going to sit in front. So even if you've let them go because they may have been an underperformer or they weren't necessarily a good fit, they're going to have to sit in front of someone else and try to sell themselves as far as why they can do it. And they rarely say, I wasn't cutting it. So, so realize that, they're going to talk about their experience, and that is how the marketplace builds a reputation of what it's like to work there, whether, it's around diversity, whether it's around inclusion, whether it's around just how the leaders treat other associates. That is how reputations get formed in a market. It's rarely the amount of money that gets invested to the current workforce around culture development. It's those who've left and have to describe why they're no longer there.
Yeah. And, Tim, even today, they have, we now have social media sites where people go record, their thoughts and feelings on past employers. And, a lot of people, I've heard from employers, well, only people that are disgruntled may go post there. And that may be true, but the reality is, and it is a perception that gets put out there about your organization, and it's one that you need to pay attention to. And, I was kind of raised, you hear it one time, it might be rumor, you hear it twice, it may be some truth to it 3 times. There may be something to that. And organizations need to pay attention to the information that's being put out there about them.
Great, good. So on the same vein, Tim, I wanted to, shift the opportunity conversation just a little bit to think about as people look at their opportunities inside an organization, sometimes it's around how visible am I? Do people know my value? Am I being recognized? So what are things that you've heard that, people volunteer for or organizations offer their current employees to help them become, more and more valuable, more visible, that might not be a direct promotion?
Yeah, and I think as the notion of diversity, equity, and inclusion continues to take hold, I think what we're going to find is that employers are recognizing that at any given time, there may be a visible project, strategic initiative that, while it may be embedded in a given functional area, there's value to have cross-functional perspectives. So, what individuals want to know is that they're seen, they're valued, and they're being developed for future opportunities. And so, you're not always going to have every role. There's not always going to be that slot that may be open. So you're going to have to be creative in terms of how you're thinking about how you're engaging with that individual. And is it right for the organization and their development to go into a different functional track because it may be right for them, or it may be of interest, or there's a visible project or a committee that you can get that individual to bring some perspective to that will round out who they're working with and around the organization. it's just trying to remove the barriers of this is how we've always done it. It's this box, you go from this box to that box.
Yeah.
And it's more around just the conversation around their professional interests and what's going on in the organization, and recognize that there may be some horizontal opportunities that still are right for that individual in the organization.
Yeah, that's excellent, Tim. You know, the other thing I was just thinking about as you kind of made that comment, Tim, is, you know, the things that to me can be equally valuable that we see organizations do that you know, don't monetarily. It's about time and commitment. I think it's equally important as you think about opportunities for growth. I would tell seeking out a sponsor within your organization. I mean, you know, there's differences, and we've talked about it before. There's mentorship, there's coaching, and there's sponsorship. And having a sponsor within an organization that can provide airspace for, there could be the opportunity to get on a project that would provide that kind of stretch experience, the opportunity to shadow her or him if they may serve on a board and get exposure to being involved and sitting in on a committee is also extremely helpful. I would also say, you know, don't wait for somebody to come to you and give you something that's going to provide that opportunity. If you see needs within the organization, you think there might be something that you can recommend that you may want to see if you can create a solution, there's always an opportunity for you to think of ways that you may be able to bring value to the organization and share that as well. I would also say, again, to the point of, you know, if you have a coach within the organization or a mentor within the organization, or if you don't, and I hear this a lot from diverse leaders are saying, well, I'd love to have somebody in the organization, but I don't see anybody that looks like me. I don't know that it necessarily has to be somebody that's diverse that can provide that same sponsorship or mentorship for you within an organization. I've been in many organizations, and often I've been the first, and in some I've been the only. And as a result, it's caused me to be creative to try to find other means. And I've had non-diverse sponsors and mentors that have been extremely impactful in influencing and directing my career. And so don't be so narrowly focused to believe that has to happen in that fashion. I do think there's ways that it can happen, to be creative, and that you have to be open-minded. And again, that doesn't mean they're going to be your only as well. People normally have multiple mentors. Not to say you wouldn't like to have a mentor that is diverse or a woman mentor, but it doesn't all have to happen within the confines of your organization as well.
I think, Deanna, that's a great point when you talk about reverse mentoring.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, imagine the experience for being the non-diverse person who gets asked by a diverse up-and-comer, if you will, or a leader or developing executive to have you as a sponsor. I know that personally I would learn a lot, you know, so those are great points. And I think we need to look at it from both sides. One of the things that's really particular, I think, to our business and where this intersects, and it might be a little myopic, but I want to get your thoughts on this. We see oftentimes that when we're called in to do a search, that there's an internal candidate. And the internal candidate, sometimes there's more than one, you know, the internal candidates they play different roles in a search, but just depending on where they are in the organization and their true readiness for the ascension into a role. But the way that's handled by employers and current leaders varies differently in my experience. So what I want to do is for our listeners today is to really maybe offer some insights, what we've heard from internal candidates, what we advise internal candidates of, what we've heard from HR leaders and executives who are making the decision on a new hire. What are some thoughts and experiences that might add value to our group?
Yeah, well, Tim, I can start there. I would just say that, you know, for us in terms of how we work with internal candidates, you know, the reality is, you know, an internal candidate is treated exactly like an external candidate. There's no difference in our book. I would say from a perception standpoint, if we go to engage with a client and they don't have an internal candidate, I would question, you know, what type of succession planning that organization is doing. I would really question, have they appropriately leveraged it? And again, I'm not going to get off question, but I do want to make another plug as we think about retention strategies and things that work well in organizations. Maximizing your HRIS system to make sure that you're giving access. Some organizations just say, well, we posted the position internally. and an expectation. Some people are heads down. What if they're not paying attention to things that are being posted? That doesn't mean there are not people out there in your organization that may have interest or the skills and capabilities to do the job. I think organizations need to be a lot more aggressive to take every opportunity when they have positions within an organization to scour their organization for potential leaders that can do this work. And I do believe that, they're sometimes willing to bring in somebody externally and invest in them to do so. Why would you not, promote somebody internally and equally invest in them to learn or grow into the position? I think it's a phenomenal opportunity. So I think that is also, to me, an important piece. In internal candidates, and I think the things that they need to do is, oftentimes people say, well, I think as an internal candidate, I may be at a advantage because you've got access to information about the organization and the culture that external candidates may not. In other instances, they say that we're disadvantaged. People have access perhaps to my baggage, and maybe I was, a different type of leader when I was a mid-careerist based to where I am now as a senior careerist. And the reality of all that is true. We all evolve in our professional development from each stage of our career and phase in our career. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity. And I would tell you, we spend a lot of time supporting and coaching internal candidates, because I do think it's a skill. What I will tell you is, when you interview as an internal candidate, don't make an expectation, don't make an assumption that people know the full breadth of your experience. They may know you in the position that you're in today, but don't have the benefit of where you may have worked previously and may not have that perspective. So keep in mind, when you may apply for something internally, make sure you bring the full breadth of all your experiences, not just where you work today, where people may have knowledge and exposure to you. I'll pause there because I can continue with some other ideas. Tim, you may have some thoughts.
No, I think especially in the interest of time, I know we're coming up close to the top of the hour. I think the only addition I would say is know that being an internal candidate's a journey. They put themselves out on a limb, whether they realize it or not. Sometimes I think they naively put themselves out on a limb. And for those who you just know are not going to get the role, be proactive in planning the escape route on how you help them get a soft landing pad.
Yeah.
Because whether they realize it or don't realize it, whether or not they actually are up for the role, they threw their hat in the ring with the intent that that's something they wanted. And that is a major retention. I don't have the statistics on this, but the number of people who throw their hat in the ring for an internal role and ultimately don't get it, how long they stay after that directly depends on, did they feel safe that they had a safe place to go back to and still contribute. So just know that thinking proactively around what it is that we're going to do with this leader if they don't get it is as important as how we're going to handle the communication itself.
Yeah, and the fact that they're going after those internal roles also say they're still feeling like they're not challenged as much in their current role and they're ready for a next step.
Yeah. We have one other question from the audience, and I know we've got about 5 minutes left, and it's a good one. I think it's back on the diversity topic. The person asks, as an applicant, they're often asked, how do I address diversity as a leader? And we've seen that in many of our executive search interview panel itineraries. And if it's the recruiter or the hiring exec, this person wants to know, what are they seeking to learn? Is there an ideal way to respond? And my thought is just sort of, how do you view it personally, and be able to kind of put your message in a non-canned perspective, but it also depends on the context in which it's asked. So Tim and Deanna, what would you say to our listener?
Yeah. My initial thought is, the question around diversity is really asking around, as you're, and then the senior leader appropriately, how are you facing the question around inclusivity? How are you creating inclusivity in your team, on your team, throughout your organization? And so I think it has a couple facets. One, you have to model it, and that either you do or you don't. That's something that you have and it has to be within you. So I think there's a modeling it from your seat and the things that you do. I think it is creating an environment that is not only diverse in terms of the leaders that are represented on your team, but also you create an environment where it is open and people are welcomed. So it's not only, like I say, diversity is one position, but it's a very intentional act. You have to create an environment where people feel like they can bring their whole selves to that team or to that organization, and they can be who they are, and they're welcome to be, and it's encouraged. I think the other piece is, it used to be historically organizations were thinking that they needed, people to be a cultural fit. I'm thankful that organizations have matured and realized that, people are not going to fit. I think what you're looking for is a contributor. You're looking for people that can bring their whole selves, the total embodiment of who they are as a professional, and their culture and their differences to an organization, and be welcomed in terms of diversity of thought, diversity of exposure, and diversity of strategy. I think it's all critically important, and there's data out there to prove that organizations that do so are much more productive, and employees tend to be more engaged. So to answer your question, it really is about what you bring to the organization. It's about what you can create in terms of inclusivity on your team, and it's how you're going to be able to support that across the organization.
Great. Well, we are at the top of the hour here, folks. So I just, as a follow-up, I would hope that our listeners today have had a few key takeaways. And just to kind of recap, understanding your talent, what they're looking for, giving them a voice in the organization is important about their own careers and their decisions. Using data to measure and support around talent decisions, and to Deanna's point, opening that up for people who need to use it to support either their own choices or leaders to support what might be available even in a merged organization. Can't say enough about recruiting your people every day, keeping them engaged, aligned. There's an attraction that got them there. Keep it growing and keep it strong. And then remember that people do work for people once they're inside your organization, and the effective leadership and growth opportunities to retain and keep those people aligned is very important. So I'd really like to thank my team here, Tim and Deanna. I'd like to thank NCHL for the opportunity to provide these webinars, and thank you all very much for your attendance.
Great.
Thank you so much, everyone. Before I end the webinar, I just want to say that a survey to evaluate your experience with this webinar should appear in your browser after I close the webinar. Please provide your feedback and let us know any feedback that you have. We have fantastic partnership with First Group and Newbrick, and we are excited to have them for this webinar series. We'll also be sending out the feedback survey in a follow-up email that should be received in the next 24 hours. So thank you to everyone for this webinar series, and we hope to see everyone at our conference in 2 weeks.
Right. Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.